Alright, today we're looking at Story of Seasons Grand Bazaar. I did a Just Gems on Fantasy Life I did a Game Lab game design analysis video on Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, and today we're looking at the final of the three in this kind of genre, which is the Story of Seasons, New Story Seasons game. Now, this is not a new game, it is a remake of a DS game, but it is fully 3D, basically revamped for the most part, except for some gameplay things, so I would consider this, generally speaking, a new game. A lot of other people consider it a new game, but just from a historical context, it is a remake of a DS game. So just keep that in mind. Story of Seasons Grand Bazaar, for what it is a farming / social sim / life sim game where you are tending to your farm, tending to your animals and stuff, trying to build the best farm you can to take it to the bazaar, which is like your similar to something like the Moonlighter shop or other aspects where you can basically once a week on a Saturday sell all your items there in your little booth to the various customers that come by and make a lot of money that way, and that effectively improves the bazaar's rating after enough time, and then that lets you have higher and higher tier bazaars, which let you sell more and more stuff and basically boost the town's notoriety. So the main kind of story focus of this farming game is trying to get a high tier of bazaar and make your way through the seasons so that your town can become known for something again, right? It's kind of like the main setup. It is a farming sim first and foremost. Unlike Rune Factory or Fantasy Life, there is no combat in this game. It is just simply either farming or the relationship stuff, which tends to mean it's a little bit slower paced and a little bit less eventful than some of the other games like Rune Factory, but I think that also lends it a little bit of an easier pick up and play feel, where you can just do a little bit at a time and still feel like you're making progress. For unique mechanics of this game, I would generally say that there's two unique mechanics to this game. Obviously, it's the bazaar, the ability to, at the end of the week, collect everything that you've been growing and sell it on a market. That's more engaging than just a typical sell box. And the other unique mechanic I would definitely say is the wind system, which is pretty simple. It's just, hey, you can jump, you can double jump, and you can glide, and that lets you have a little bit more movement for both traversing around town as well as, going throughout your farm and stuff like that. It's a little bit easier to do when you have more movement, right? You're not just limited to like a sprint. The jump, double jump, and glide also help you for things around the farm, especially considering that you have a little bit of a boost you can do. So like instead of just watering everything individually, if you jump and water stuff, you can water more, right? So the movement options there are definitely, I think, a unique mechanic that not a lot of other games or farming games really go for. But other than that, everything else here is pretty typical, pretty traditional. There's nothing crazy in like the visual style or the music or any of the specific mechanics in farming that make it kind of stand out, but definitely the bazaar and the movement here is relatively unique. Overall, if I would recommend the game or not, here's the tough thing. I am not a farming game person. Despite my interest in trying to get into the genre with the various farming games that I have tried to get into. I've tried, Sakuna Rise of Ruin, Stardew Valley, Fantasy Life I, Rune Factory 4 Special, the new Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, Ooblets, Wildflowers, Farm Tycoon, Roots of Pacha, and this is what? So you'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is my 9th farming game that I'm trying to get into. And of the ones I listed, Fantasy Life I was the one I spent the most time in. Personally speaking, I did a little bit of Stardew Valley, didn't really kind of vibe with it. Did not like Rune Factory 4 from what I played, did not like Ooblets or Wildflowers. Roots of Patch was okay. And so, there's a lot of farming games, and so I would say Fantasy Life I is the closest one I came, even though that's not really a farming game. And Story Seasons Grand Bazaar, I would say it's the second one. And the reason I like this one so much is because it really takes its time. And that's kind of something that I think was hard to understand when I started playing it. But I kind of realized that pretty much after I got access to the windmill, which is something you get access to that lets you kind of simultaneously craft a bunch of things. You don't really have like a crafting bench or anything like that. You go to the windmill and you're able to produce a bunch of items there, and you're able to do like 6 or 7 at a time. And then those items will effectively work as they'll be producing stuff while you're out and about doing things. That's really kind of when it clicked, and I realized what the kind of thing it was trying to do was. A lot of the farming elements before that point, and a lot of the kind of interactions with the NPCs there weren't that interesting. They were cool, right? Like there is voice acting in the game, and I think that's very nice. But they weren't exactly something that was like getting me into it. And when I got the windmill, I was finally understanding. I'm like, oh wow, this is really a good game. It's well designed, right? Like it's well, the loop works well, and it also feels very like tightly designed, which is not something I can say for a lot of these games. So overall, even though I don't generally recommend farming games, and nor do I generally like them, I would say if you're going to pick a farming game, this is absolutely the one to do it. And obviously the first one would be like Fantasy Life, even though that's I think more of an RPG with some farming elements. At this point, as I said in the Rune Factory video, Rune Factory Gardens of Azuma is not a farming game pretty much at all. I would actually argue that that's more of a like village management primarily, which it does focus on. So I can't really qualify that as a farming game either. But I would recommend this for being a farming game. So what's it on? It's on pretty much everything. It's on PC, Switch 1, Switch 2, and it does have a Switch 2 edition, which is what I'm playing here. How long is it? Now, this game is new, so it doesn't have a how long to beat currently, but the original game had anywhere from a 40 to a 90-hour runtime, depending on what you did. So I would say that, assuming everything here works out around that, but also assuming that those numbers aren't super accurate because not a ton of people have logged it, and considering the fact that they've sped up some of these things, I would assume that total will remain about the same. You may see a little bit less playtime because of the speeding up of some of the elements in this game compared to the original, but I suspect anywhere from 40 to 90 hours, and this game obviously is more about the journey than the destination, right? These kind of games are things you kind of just play, and beating them is not really a thing that tends to happen. I mean, obviously you can beat the game, there's a story, but it's one of these games that's not really designed for you to just like grind through. For pricing and sales, so this one's a tough one because the game on every platform is $50, which is a decent price. For a remake, that tends to be what in these like AA remake spaces they go for, but the Switch 2 version, which is what I have here, is $60 because they charge an extra $10 for the Switch 2 edition, similar to what Rune Factory does, which is another marvelous game. This is a tough one because there is definitely a lot of content here, but I do think, and especially considering the other farming games that tend to be in like the $30 to $40 range, I think 50 is okay of a price. I think if you really like these kind of games, 50 is an absolute buy. I paid 60 for it because it was on the Switch 2, and that was pretty much a risk based on the fact that I'm gonna like one of these goddamn farming games, I know it, so I bought it at full price, more than full price technically speaking. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this game at 60. I don't think it has the necessary, not production values, but just the necessary oomph and specialness to it that really demands that price, but I do think 50 or 40 is a good price for it. Luckily speaking, unlike some other games from some other publishers here, we know for a fact that Rune Factory tends to go, and you know, all Marvelous games pretty much, right, tend to go on a pretty good sale. So not huge sale, right? You're never going to get much more than like over 50%, but you know, a half off on these games will make it like 25, 30 bucks. That's an absolute steal. So I definitely would, I guess, recommend it at the normal price of $50. I don't think I would necessarily recommend it at 60, but assuming these sales of previous Marvelous games go into effect here, any sale price that they have is definitely worth it. So answering the next question, obviously, is it worth the price? I would say absolutely. Some notes. This footage, like with most of my footage on the Switch and Switch 2, is being interpolated to 60 FPS because, well, the game runs at 60. The capture for the Switch is still locked at 30, meaning I have to interpolate that in the shutter encode software to be able to actually get back to a normal frame rate that I think works. Because of that, you may see some artifacts, so just of note there. I also don't believe that there's any restrictions in showing this. I know sometimes I've had some games show when I try and record them, like you can't record them, and I will talk about one of those games coming up here. The Caligula Effect 2 does not let me record gameplay for some reason, so I'll have to get around that somehow, but no restrictions there. So that's it for notes. Now let's talk about the gameplay loop, which is probably what you're here for in terms of a farming game. Gameplay loop is you start off with your farm, you know, standard farm stuff, tilling the soil, watering crops, doing that thing, getting animals, getting tools, and pretty much your objective, as I mentioned earlier with the Bazaar, is to cultivate enough crops and create enough things in the windmill and, you know, other aspects like that to be able to go to the Bazaar and sell them for more money than you would typically be able to sell them just normally, right? You know, you might pick up wood or whatever, and you can go to the windmill and craft logs, and those logs can be used to craft other things, or they can be sold for higher amounts of money. When you're not doing that and you're not building up your crops, because those are kind of passive things, you are going into town, buying materials, talking to people, and doing requests. One thing that this game does a little bit differently than some other games is each of the, I guess you could say, companion quests are fully voice acted. The entire game, for the most part, is fully voice acted, which is very nice. And a lot of the quests are also, cutscenes. They have a lot of somewhat cutscene, production value, music, that kind of thing, which is very appreciated. On the map, you can check, and there'll be a little like red or orange dot. And it'll basically say, hey, this person is here, and they can accept your quest. What they're called scenes, right? And these scenes are very cool because they will involve characters being in certain locations at certain times. So Lloyd, for instance, is one you'll get early on, and he'll be in the bottom left of the town, but he'll only be there in the mornings. So if it's past like 11:30 or something, he'll disappear, right? So you effectively lose access to that day's next step in Lloyd's, I guess, story, if you will. So yeah, gotta be kind of mindful of that, but I do really like how that kind of operates into where like people have lives and they are going about their lives, and you see them at different places and stuff, and so that is quite nice. But yeah, when you're not doing the farming and the animals and the production of that stuff to go to the bazaar, you're talking to people, growing the relationship there, and that kind of thing. So overall, in terms of like the gameplay loop, I would say it's pretty decent, although it is also very simple, right? None of these things are super complex. There's not some crazy mechanic that's like super special to the game or anything like that. So I would say, while it is a good gameplay loop, it is nothing that's very addictive, right? It's kind of just like, it plays itself pretty safe, which may be a downside to some people, but I suspect coming from games like Rune Factory, the new Rune Factory game, that's what people want, is something just like traditional farming, nothing weird going on, Because there hasn't really been a good just farming game in a while, which is kind of what I wanted to talk about, is that there hasn't been a ton of good farming games. The Rune Factory 5 was bad, and that was like 4 years ago. So to have a spin-off that doesn't focus on that being a new game is kind of disappointing to a lot of people. So this game getting high reviews is based on that fact, that like people like the fact that this is just a traditional farming game because they haven't had a good traditional farming game in like 5 or 6 years, The story seasons went with like a Diaramon ones. Both of those games did not review that well. The previous like A Wonderful Life remake was bad. So Story Seasons has been pretty hit or miss. Rune Factory has been pretty hit or miss. Rune Factory 4 came out in like 2012 or something, So it's been quite a bit since they've had just a good farming game. And so I think a lot of people will enjoy a lot of the more traditional aspects of this game because it's finally a good farming game they haven't had in a while, So while it may be boring to some people, I definitely think if you're looking for this and you're looking for like a good farming game they haven't had in a while, you're going to quite enjoy some of these elements to there. So that's it for the gameplay loop. Because of that, I'd add that section there to kind of just talk about it, because the next section, how to play the game, unlike my other videos on like Monster Hunter, for example, it's quite simple. I guess the only interesting thing I would say is that the L and R buttons select between your tools and your crops, and your tools do not take up a inventory slot. Thank God, because you have a very limited inventory in this game. You have about 2 slots to start, and then you can expand it later, but thank God the tools don't take up that slot. You have those 2 sections, as I said, your tools and otherwise. Your tools go in the tool section. You can upgrade them later on. There's only, a hotbar full of tools, so you're not going to have like 25 tools you have to kind of mix and match, that kind of thing. Crops, pretty simple, right? All the buttons are showcased on the side, so you never have to figure out what you need to press. But as I mentioned before, in terms of the unique mechanics, you can jump and eventually double jump, and it will let you do things a little quicker, right? Instead of doing 1 at a time, it lets you do 3 in any given spot with just the basic tools, right? And then if you increase that, then you can, do higher and higher amounts, right, as the time goes on. But generally speaking, the playing of the game is relatively simple, right? There's not a lot to really talk about here. It's all simple button presses. You're not like mixing and managing a village, for instance, or you're not trying to like city build Jurassic Park or anything like that. It's all relatively baseline there. Pros and cons here. I would say some of the pros, absolutely, as I've written down here, are the art style. One thing that attracted me to this game is the quality of this remake's art style. Again, it's a fully 3D remake of a DS game. So DS games weren't really 3D in any capacity. This is a full 3D remake, so the art style is very pleasant. Audio, not necessarily music, but the audio design is very good, right? Planting and watering and doing all that stuff does feel nice, and there's some good tracks, especially at night, that I was impressed with. The voice acting is also very good for a lot of the characters, and there's quite a bit of it, which I was interested in. And performance. So this is where we go into things. I guess this is more later on into like performance and technical, but the performance of this game is quite good. It's running at a locked 60 FPS 1080p on Switch 2 handheld mode. No anti-aliasing issues, no frame rate issues. It's running locked. It sounds great. It feels great. Controls are great. All that. So I would say those are definitely the 4 main pros. Some cons, if you don't like the more traditional farming sim gameplay, then you are not going to like this game. It doesn't have any combat or anything else to kind of break that up. The other thing I would say is just some of the elements in terms of like the Bazaar could definitely, I think, be improved. I think it takes a little bit too long of you doing the Bazaar for the Bazaar to really kind of come into play. What I mean by that is, the Bazaar at the start is like 3 items you can put on a shelf, and some people go by and you ring the bell and you have to swap some items out. And that stays pretty much that level of complexity, which is like baby mode for a couple months. So I would say like 1, 2, 3, 4. The first 4 Bazaars or so are pretty much like that, which, considering Bazaars are only once a week, it means that the first month of your game here are pretty basic. And so that may be a turnoff for some people. But overall, I would say beyond those 2 elements, which, can be annoying to some, there's not really many cons with this game. I do think what it's doing very well. And I think a lot of people are going to appreciate that. Some platform issues, as I mentioned before, for the performance, there was no issues. It was running at lock 60. There's no anti-aliasing problems, no pop-in problems, no weird bugs or glitches I've encountered. The technical state is very polished. It performs very well. It feels nice. It doesn't drain the battery like crazy, right? So all the things you'd expect maybe don't work necessarily as well are working flawlessly. I would also hope so, because you spent an extra $10 on the Switch version to make it possible. So I would really hope that it is the case, but, as I mentioned in the Rune Factory video, that game did not run as well as I wanted it to. There were some pretty big issues in terms of the frame rate fluctuation and pop-in that kind of dragged it down, especially because that game was $70 US, right? But for this game here, absolutely no issues there. Conclusion, I think that this is a great game that you should absolutely play if you like farming games, or if you're even interested in a farming game, this is absolutely the one to get. There's enough polish here in terms of its art style and audio to really make the entire project itself as a remake feel very complete. Nothing feels like it was glossed over for the sake of saving money or saving time. While the mechanics may be a little bit traditional, for some, I think that is a benefit to others, and that you'll like it if you like other things like this, right? And to not necessarily write this off just because of those more traditional elements. Something I didn't comment on is like the characters, and I do think the characters are quite good. So if you're also looking for more of a social life sim kind of aspect, then I think you'll be quite impressed with this game overall. And because of that, I would definitely recommend the game, as I mentioned before in the recommendation and the pricing section. So if you want to check this out, it's available on everything, including Switch 2. It runs great, as I mentioned before, on Switch 2. So yeah, if you want to see more of this kind of content and reviews on the channel, make sure to like, subscribe, do all that, comment down below what you're excited about for the game, and I'll see everyone in the next video.